Hi. So here we are, San Francisco, home of Google and Apple. Last time we gave that talk, we were in Warsaw, in Poland, right?
Oh yeah, we were. We were in Warsaw last time.
Yeah.
Hang on. When we were in Warsaw, you talked about #courage, right?
Yeah, well, look at that. I mean,
But a lot has happened since then. So are you still feeling courageous now that you've finally embraced the future?
well, when you mention the future, that's not really what comes to my mind when I see this.
Seriously low blow, dude. Seriously low blow. If we're going to go there, then, well, we have to talk about this as well then. So you're talking about the future. That's the future when 2 years from now, the version of Android from 2 years ago is finally on everyone's phone. Is that what we're talking about?
That's a classic.
Are we going to do this?
I mean, yeah. At least I don't have to code with all these square brackets. I mean, like, look at this. I can't even.
Seriously, dude. You know about Swift, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know Swift, the language that Kotlin copied?
What? What is that even? I know that your OS is called High Sierra, but Kotlin copying Swift, I don't even know where that comes from. I don't. Oh.
It's totally true, but hang on. What are we doing?
Yeah.
Like, we used to work together, and we're kind of our friends, despite everything that just happened. We're in San Francisco. Obviously, the Kool-Aid has got a little bit to us.
Yeah.
Maybe we should try this again. We are professionals, honestly.
Oh, yeah.
Let's do some introductions.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Romain. I work for Deliveroo in London. I'm an Android developer there. And previously, I was working for Songkick, where I had the chance to work with Michael.
So that would make me Michael. Yeah, I'm an iOS developer at a Kotlin conference. Don't kill me. Yeah, I currently work at the BBC in London. But before that, yeah, we worked together at Songkick.
So yeah, our time at Songkick was pretty awesome, and yeah, we got to learn a lot. Today, we're going to share some of these learnings, but first, we'd like to say that we don't work there anymore, so we're not talking on Songkick's behalf in any way. That's
right, but every company that we're going to talk about has given their blessing for us to be here, so hopefully there's no litigation coming. So you know a little bit about us, and we want to learn a few things about all of you. And we want to ask some questions, so basically yes-no questions, but because there is a lot of people, and we don't have time to count you all, and also the cameras would kill us because then they'd have to swing around and everything. Instead of raising your hand like you normally would, just clap instead. Do you get it? Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, that works, yeah.
That works, great. So who is a mobile developer? There's a lot of mobile developers. Backend? Oh, not so many, but who does both? Yeah, well, we kind of do both a little bit. Anyone not do either of those? Oh,
we're with you.
Okay, cool. So what are we actually doing here? Well, we mentioned Kotlin and we've mentioned Swift as well. So it's the second time in this conference, in this room as well, actually, if you came here yesterday. And what we really want to talk about today is how learning and using both languages can kind of increase collaboration between your iOS developers and your Android developers, and even sort of front end and back end. So maybe we should ask them a few more questions.
Yeah, I feel like
a bit more about each
we're
other.
missing a small question, which is like, who here would say that their main language is now Kotlin? It's catching up, yeah.
Okay, cool, my turn. Who here, main language is Swift? Oh, my people, but I mean,
I'm actually surprised.
I thought there'd be a few more though, right?
Yeah. That's not really what we're supposed to do, right? We're not going to talk about Swift like the whole talk, right? Like,
we did in Warsaw. In Warsaw we did Swift, and there was like 50% Swift developers.
Well, this conference is called KotlinConf, so we can't just do that. I think we have to adjust a bit. I think, yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I have been doing more Kotlin since May, so that's all right. And I do actually now have an Android phone, but if you tell anyone, I will kill you.
I didn't know that.
But yeah, all right, look, don't worry. We are professionals, despite everything, the impression that we're giving. So let's pretend we didn't talk about Swift quite so much there. And let's start with Songkick a little bit more.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So at Songkick, we were doing quite a lot of collaboration. We were not really pairing across Android and iOS platforms, but we're doing a lot of other stuff, like starting with kickoffs, for example.
Yeah.
So whenever we would start working on a new feature, we would start with a kickoff, which was kind of a high-level summary of what we wanted to build and why we wanted it. So it was quite platform agnostic, so it made sense to involve everyone in the team. So not only the people who would build the feature, so also like iOS people for an Android feature, or also like backend developers or whoever could have a good input into that.
Yeah, and the really cool thing about doing stuff like that is that it, as well as highlighting issues, it also gives you a chance to kind of discuss each other's approaches to things. So, for example, you were building the Android app using RX and MVVM, which was stuff that I'd never heard of before, and now things that I use in my own projects as well. So it's a really great way to kind of find out what's happening on the other platforms. And of course, no app really exists in an offline bubble these days. So, yeah, it was while I was at Songcake that I kind of found myself with RubyMine in one hand and Ruby on Rails guide in the other, actually kind of building out API changes, which was a first for me as well.
Yeah, and most of the time these changes were done as a pair.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, so often we would pair to it together as well, and sometimes that wasn't necessarily with a backend developer. Sometimes it was with another mobile developer. So another first for me was pairing with an Android developer, and we were both actually doing stuff in Ruby. We weren't even doing native code. So yeah, another first for me.
Yeah, another thing that I really liked at Songcake was QA. So whenever we would make a new release, we would actually, like the whole team was involved in QAing the new release, which was pretty powerful and a bit weird at first because like when you're an Android developer, you don't really know the iOS equivalent of what you're working for, which is kind of quite a shame when you think about it because it's a lot of missed possibilities to make the product more consistent across the board.
Yeah, and possibly one of my favorite things was how much we were encouraged to share as well. So my favorite thing was the mobile breakfast, which is exactly how it sounds. Free breakfast, and you talk about tech. I mean, what is not to like? Yeah, and that was where we were kind of talking about things like what's happening with I/O and what the latest developments were at WWDC as well. Yeah, and we would also have a showcase every 2 weeks. And again, we wouldn't do the showcase as a kind of like the iOS team have done this, the Android team have done that. We would be like the mobile team are doing this. Really, really powerful way to communicate to the whole company that it is a team. I guess what we're really talking about is kind of like sort of T-shaped engineering, really. You know, this idea that you kind of go deep on a few skills, but really broad on lots of others. And it's a really great way to increase collaboration and communication across the company.
Yeah, and I think so. Let's get back to this talk. So I think at some point we're like at the pub, and one of us was complaining how much
British.
How much it's like annoying that Android and iOS developers are always trying to fight to prove that their platform is just the best. That's how we do that, right? And how much it sucks, and we should just like do the opposite, try to work together to build better products.
Oh, that's right, yeah. And you were like, yeah, we should do something about this. We should do like a talk or something sometime. And I'd had a few pints, and I was like, yeah, we totally should. We should definitely do a talk sometime. And then you called me, and you were like, you said you were going to do a talk sometime. And I was like, yeah, we should totally do a talk. I said that, yeah. And he was like, well, we're going to Warsaw to do it. And I was like, oh, shit, really? All right, well, what the hell are we going to say? I mean...
Yeah, at the beginning, we didn't really know what we were doing.
We were like, yeah, you should work together as one team. That's great, thanks. That's awesome. That will be a 1-minute lightning talk.
Yeah, we're still professional.
But then you had the idea, you were like, oh, well, why don't you teach me some Swift, and I'll teach you some Kotlin. So we're like, okay, that's cool. So I downloaded Android Studio, and, well, then hit install, and what the hell does it do for all that time? It takes forever to install. I thought Xcode was bad, but
I think no one really knows. Like, we go grab a cup of coffee, and it's done after that. Yeah,
but eventually, I did actually get Android Studio installed, and then I was like, well, okay, great. So what are we going to build? I mean, we could do Hello World, but it's not going to get us very far.
Yeah, I think we spent half a session just trying to figure out what we wanted to build and how to name it.
Because naming is hard.
Yeah, it's really hard. And then eventually we decided that we would build a simple app on both platforms that would pull down some kind of data from an API and show that to the user, a very simple app. But then we burned even more time trying to find the right API, right?
Well, there's so many great APIs these days. There's like the Pokemon API, there's like Star Wars, there's Marvel.
Yeah, Minions as well. We missed that.
Hang on, there's a Minions API?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh,
yeah.
We may be busy later.
Yeah, at some point we took a step back and we just realized that the whole talk was about collaboration. So we would come up with this plan, which is, so we would build a very simple schedule app for that conference, for MCE. We would parent it as much as possible. We would avoid focusing on the actual architecture. The whole point is, again, collaboration. Then we would build the iOS app in Swift and the Android app in Kotlin.
Yeah. So it was really fun. We got to learn a lot. Wow, that's super pixelated. Yeah, the really cool thing I thought was that just in just a few hours, I was kind of able to actually write Kotlin and kind of feel like I kind of understood what I was doing. And it was really spooky. You were kind of explaining to me stuff like, for example, like how you lay out cells and tables and lists, as you call them. And I was like, this is really spooky. It sounds a lot like iOS. And then you were like, oh, we have this really cool thing now. We have this like constraint layout. And I was like, kind of sounds like auto layout. Not fighting, don't worry. And I was like, okay, it sounds like auto layout. So I went home and I kind of checked. And it's not like auto layout. It's exactly the same. They both use category constraint resolution. So I was like, man, this Android stuff is like super easy. You were like even telling me like, oh, we need to like bind cells in order to like set up the text. And I was like, oh, well in Swift we'd use this as like this optional cast. And you were like, oh yeah, it works. And I was like, yeah, I've totally got this. I can now do iOS and Kotlin. I'm like a 10x dev.
So yeah, the following week we decided to switch role to prove that Swift is not that difficult as well. So we would pair on the iOS app. It was quite spooky as well how quickly comfortable I was with the actual language. So obviously I don't have any like strong iOS experience, and like obviously anything that was related to the SDK itself I couldn't like just like grab it straight away. But the language itself, like I could at least understand what it was doing. So. Yeah, it was really good to sit like next to someone who actually knows the language, because I think I would have just got lost very quickly otherwise.
You were going to say expert then, but you couldn't quite bring yourself to do it, could you? You couldn't quite bring yourself.
It's in the notes.
But anyway, yeah. So we then had two apps that were displaying the conference schedule for this conference in MCE in Warsaw. But they were just hard-coded values, which is not really very real-world realistic. So we kind of like, well, we should probably build an API then as well, because as I'm sure the conference organizers here know, if there's one thing you can guarantee at a conference is that things are going to change. So we needed an API so that we could change things on the fly. And we were like, well, if we're going to build an API, we're going to need to build it in something that also makes sense for this conference. So we decided we were going to look and see if we could build an API in Kotlin or in Swift. And it was kind of around this time I was doing a similar thing at work, actually. So I was working on a product where we needed to build like a general API, except I was really keen to have an API that was kind of much more focused on delivering what the app needed. But the CTO wasn't quite so keen, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. And it was kind of around then that I came across this idea of having, instead of having either of these ideas, but having both as well. So it's an idea that's been growing in popularity in the last few years. It's called kind of Backend for frontend. And the idea is that instead of having like one or the other, you have both. You have a general purpose API, but then you have specialisms in microservices that are focused on providing different services to different clients. The idea being that this not only removes logic from each client, but it also helps the client to do exactly what the client should be doing, which is simply to be taking data and to be presenting it to the user. The business logic kind of moves up a level, and the client's focus on presentation layer.
So yeah, we decided to go with this architecture, very simplified, obviously. So we would have like a Swift backend that would expose some kind of data from a database. Then we would have the backend for frontend, which would sit in between the backend and the apps, and it would like basically like convert the raw data exposed by the Swift backend to something that we could call view models, so that are just ready to be bound to the views by the apps. Yeah.
And because this was a hobby project, we obviously wanted to use all the shiny things that we could find. So I was like, we should definitely be using Katura, because I've just seen a talk by IBM, and they say it's great. But I also work at a company called the BBC, and we like to be very impartial there, so I should say other frameworks also exist, including Vapor and Perfect. But yeah, so we tried to get Katura working on Heroku, and they were just not very good friends at the time. So I ended up using a different framework called Curacao by Carl Fuller. But yeah, so this is kind of what it looks like. We wanted to emulate kind of having having a schedule in like a database, but we didn't really want to have a database as well. So we just decided to emulate it in kind of in a model. So this is kind of what you'd imagine a conference might look like, right? You know, you've got a time zone, a locale, a title, and then a schedule is an array of talks. This is kind of what it looks like for the actual KotlinConf, and obviously all conferences start with registration. And by the time we got around to doing KotlinConf, we are happy to report that Katura and Heroku have become very good friends. And it's really, really easy to deploy to Heroku now. So we're able to move back to using Katura. And this is what it looks like in Katura. I think it's really readable and really lovely, simple way to write your server.
Yeah, and on the backend front-end side, so which is in Kotlin, I wanted to go full Kotlin as well and use a framework called Ktor, built by JetBrains. It's really easy to set up. I got it running in a few minutes. But I got into the same kind of trouble as Michael did with Katura, sorry. I couldn't make it work on Heroku as well. So I was just like, okay, let's not spend more time on this. I just went for Spark Java and Kotlin at that time.
Maybe it was us.
It's possibly us. I think we're like back in noobs, obviously. And then so this is how what kind of data that we expose to the clients. So very generic, as you can see. The backend front end doesn't really expose what it's actually represented. It's very view based. So we're just talking about the title, the subtitle, and even date and time could be a bit more generic than this, to be honest. And this is what we call the schedule repository, which would make the actual call to the backend, filter the events based on the date that it was passed by the clients, because the client can actually say oh yeah, I want to filter based on that date. Then converts the actual event to viewable items, and then return a JSON string based on that. And finally, this is where we describe our routes. So eventually, I managed to make Ktor work, so I'm not going to bother you with any Spark Java code. So this is how it looks today. So this is where we just describe our route. So we have one route, which is /conference/schedule.json. Then we just grab some kind of query parameters from the clients, from the request, and then get the JSON from the schedule repository and return that to the client. The interesting bit here is the accept language header. Essentially, what you want to do with the backend frontend is extract any kind of logic from your client. You want your clients to be dumb and have a consistent experience everywhere. And something like this kind of logic could be, for example, internalization. You could just pass a language and have formatted string on the backend frontend and return that to your client.
Yeah, so this is what they look like. These are real apps, not on the store, obviously, but they are real apps, and all the code is downloadable. Yeah, and the really nice thing is that they're really simple. I recommend you go and have a look at the code. So with the backend and front end, all of the business logic has moved up one layer. So they literally are just pulling down this data and then rendering it onto the screen. It's really nice, very simple, straightforward architecture. And the other cool thing about doing this kind of pattern is that you can then start talking about doing other things, like, for example, A/B testing becomes a much easier thing to talk about because you know that the backend and front-end client is specific to certain platforms, so it's much easier to kind of predict what the side effects of that are going to be, much easier than if you have a general-purpose API, which you all know over time starts to get quite a big tangled mess otherwise. So let's look at a little bit more code. So this is the data model. The really nice thing about this is that, as you can see, this is on my left-hand side is the iOS app, but next to it is the Android app, and remarkably similar. And then the really cool thing is that the Android app and the backend front end use a huge amount of the same shared code, which is really lovely. So again, you're getting this kind of shared knowledge, this shared understanding. So we talked before about kind of binding in the information from the API onto the views, and here it is again in Swift at the top and in Kotlin below. And we should say we haven't tried to mangle this. This is exactly how it just fell out as we wrote it. We haven't kind of tried to make it look the same, but you can see it's remarkably similar. And then just to kind of prove that it's not all about making it look the same, These two are quite different. You've got the Swift at the top and the Kotlin below. But what I think is really interesting is that, certainly for me, as a Swift developer first, is that I can read the Kotlin as well. And I think it's really interesting that even though they're not similar pieces of code, they're very easily readable, really approachable bits of code.
So yeah, off we went to MCE with some examples of collaboration from our experience at Songkick, then with our pairing exercise, with our backend frontend, and I think it went well, right?
It went really, really well. We got really great feedback. We were very happy, bouncy kids. So we went off to celebrate, and it being Poland, we had pierogi, and we had wine, and we had shots of vodka. And then we were like, we should do this again, And I was like, where else in the world could we go? Who else could we talk about? We're like, oh, there's a conference in San Francisco, it's KotlinConf, let's do that. So we emailed to them, and then I forgot to check my Google Mail for weeks, and then I was like, oh my God, they've said yes.
Actually, a lot have happened since then, so it was quite interesting because starting from this, for example, Google announcing that Kotlin is now the first class citizen in the Android world, which is really exciting. Everyone was just super excited. And then the first thing that came to our mind after the fact that it was excited was that, like, oh, damn,
now we have to rewrite everything.
We have to rewrite everything. Yeah.
Great.
It's great. Thanks, Google. No, I think it's really good news for the Android community because I think, we were kind of stuck with Java and looking at our iOS friends with kind of jealous eyes, like, oh, they have that shiny Swift language. I think it's, like, obviously, like, nothing was really blocking us from jumping in the Kotlin train before, but the fact that now it's official, like, makes it safer to jump, like, to actually use Kotlin in production code, so, yeah. Yeah,
and after I got over Google ruining our talk, I kind of realized how exciting it was as well, even from a Swift point of view. So one of the really interesting things that's happened with Swift is that people are much more interested in what I do now. So there was a time, obviously, when people would literally talk about my code as like, it gives me a headache, all those square brackets, how can you do that all day? But now people are actually talking to me and being like, oh, what's this language about? And I could see that the same thing was going to happen with Kotlin as well. And moreover, because these languages are quite similar, I think I could see that this was potentially going to start happening between iOS and Android and actually going to start talking to each other about their languages, something that is really, really uncommon, I think, when we were talking about Java and Objective-C. So here is some Objective-C. This is something I was quite happy to write over and over again whenever I needed to get a cell into a table. What strikes me now is, like, how many times do you have to say UI table view cell to kind of beat it into your head that you need a table view cell? Now in Swift, it just drops this. It's like it says exactly the same thing, but it's much simpler, much more expressive, much more clean. Yeah, that's exactly what I like with Kotlin or Swift, is the fact that anything that you would want to write, you can find a very readable way to write it. And yeah, the really powerful thing is that, like, they kind of read the same way as well. So if you know Kotlin, you can actually understand Swift. So it gives us more power to communicate with the iOS developers. That's great. Although I was kind of on the way here trying to debunk that a little bit. So the next holiday for us in the UK is Christmas. We don't have Thanksgiving. So this is some Swift that prints out the 12 days of Christmas in a style that makes me feel like I have a headache and want to be a bit sick. So, any language is entirely possibly abusable. Yeah, it's terrible. But, like, actually, you got a point. I think even with real-life example like this one, you can push the code a bit too much. Like this is very simple. Like on Android, like you would want to just fill your menu based on a Boolean show menu and return true or false based on that. And if you're a Kotlin expert, you might think like, oh, I could write that in a single line, like you could do here. But should you? Okay, these two code actually do exactly the same thing, but I know that in 5 months' time, I'll get back to this code. I will understand the first example, and it will take me a few minutes to understand the second one. Yeah, so we should go back to Google ruining our talk. Yeah. So when we did it the first time, you see, we were kind of like hipsters. We were like, oh, you know some Kotlin, you should totally learn some Swift. Oh, you know Swift, you should learn some Kotlin. And everyone's like, what the hell are you talking about? But yeah, so we got back to it, and we were like, well, we can't do that anymore. Now Google have made it mainstream, just like when your favorite band becomes really big. So we were like, okay, we'll have to spend more time together. And so that's what we did. We spent more time together. We started pairing a bit more and kind of learning a bit more about each other's languages. And that's kind of when we realized that what the talk was really all about, apart from freaking out Swift and Kotlin developers, was really about collaboration. And then we also had another realization as well, that we were kind of being quite siloed as well. We were busy because we were native developers talking about just iOS and Android. But there is a third, of course. There is the web, and there's mobile web, even if we just want to be sort of thinking about mobile. So I was like, well, we have to build a web version as well. And you were like, what, with everything else we have to do? I'm like, yes, we have to build a web version. So we do have a web version as well. So that you can actually hit this up, and you'll get the schedule for this conference.
It's very simple.
Using the same technology that we've got. We didn't pay for the full Heroku, so it's a bit slow. It's just a free tier.
Yeah, and you've been quite busy as well. While working, learning Kotlin, you started that repository Kotlin for Swift developers, just writing down how to move from that Swift thing to that Kotlin thing. Yeah, go check it out. It's really interesting.
Yeah. If you're doing both, then give me a hand. I could really do with some help. But it just kind of helps me remember how to kind of move between the two. So a lot has changed since we started, as I say, a long time ago in Warsaw. And in fact, not just the platforms and technologies have changed, but also our jobs have changed as well, right?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. As I said at the beginning, I work for a food delivery company called Deliveroo. It doesn't exist here, so you might haven't heard of it, but it's quite popular in countries in Europe or Australia or Hong Kong. And what we do is that we offer, we give users apps to get their favorite food from their favorite restaurants. And so at Deliveroo, we work in feature teams. So my team is responsible for making sure that the customer experience is the best after they place their order. And this is one of the screens that I'm responsible of, which is the screen that you will see as soon as you place your order until you get your food. And recently, we realized that the architecture of our backend services was kind of holding us back from moving quickly. So basically, we were relying on that general purpose API, which was shared with other teams. So every time we wanted to add some new features, we would actually have to run into conflicts with other teams. And the second thing as well is that we this was a general purpose API, so we would have to do some kind of post-processing on each of our clients, which was obviously error prone because you could have some duplication and have some different behavior on each of your clients. So essentially you could have a different result on your iOS app or your Android app and your web client. And this is not something that we wanted. So we decided to revisit that, and what we did is that we created a new system that was living outside of that first system that we would be responsible of, and it acts like a backend frontend. And so the whole idea was to move that extra layer of logic up, and so the new API actually exposed all that formatted data, as you can see here, which is just ready to be bound to the apps, so that we're sure that we're showing consistent data across clients. And I think that was quite a success, not only on the technical side. It was really interesting to see the whole teams actually reacting to that change, because everyone started to take ownership of the whole product and not only on their small system, because people started to understand the overall architecture. So essentially, you would see some interesting interactions iOS and Android developers pairing together, or front-end and back-end doing some code reviews together, or having maybe back-end and designers having some discussions as well. So it was really interesting to see the whole team reacting to that.
Yeah, and as I said, I've changed jobs as well. So I now work for a company in the UK called the BBC, which is a broadcaster. And this is the Salford office, which Salford is near Manchester in the UK. And when I went up there for the first time, I kind of was chatting to the team up there, and chatting to the sports team, which is what you see there, which is sports news. And I found out that that team works together as one team. So they're doing iOS and Android, Swift and Kotlin all of the time. And so I reached out to them and I said, "Hey, I'm coming to this conference, and how's it going and stuff." And I should prefix this by saying that we in the UK have a very dry sense of humour, and the further north you go, the kind of drier the sense of humour goes. So if you talk to any iOS developer who used to do Objective-C, then you have to talk about square brackets. I was like, "Yeah, that's great, guys. What else have you got to say?" Excellent. I think we had a bit of a holy war about garbage collection yesterday, so we should probably move on very swiftly. I was like, very good, but what can you say about what you're doing day to day? And this is what they told me. And And what I think is really interesting about this is that in the same breath, they talk about both languages and about the benefits of both languages. I didn't prompt them to do this. It's just how it fell out. And I wonder if I'd asked them about Objective-C and Java, I don't think this was the kind of response I would have got. So I also mentioned that I discovered about the backend for frontend while I was working at another company. So this is an insurance company in the UK that's launching in the near future called Risk. And yeah, there, as I say, we were struggling with this general purpose API idea. And yeah, so you can imagine for an insurance company, you're going to need to tell people how much they need to pay each week in order to be insured. So here's kind of how that would look in a kind of typical JSON style. The problem with this is, if we want to charge them with, say, Apple Pay, you end up doing a huge amount of transforms. And then, even worse, if you want to actually talk to them in like a human-readable language, then there's a load more you need to do as well. So we looked at the backend for front-end idea as well. The CTO was really keen to keep a general-purpose API because we had lots of ideas for future growth in the company in terms of connecting with other services. But the backend for front-end sounded like it would be a perfect way to kind of get a bit for both. So this is kind of what it actually looks like now as well. So we've still got the bit that we need to pump into Apple Pay, but we're getting a string down that we can just render straight to the screen. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it just means that there's a whole load of code that just drops away, and more positively, the app is really predictable as well. We know exactly what's going to be shown to the user, so we can also use this for things like customer support as well. We know what it is that the user is going to be seeing. We don't have to guess based on what the client has actually done to the values that we pass down. And I bumped into the CTO recently, and I told him that I was coming here. And I kind of like, how is it all going? And this is what he said. So everything has just got much simpler now. We've kind of got one-way flows of data through the app. And yeah, just everything is much, much simpler. And something else that has changed since then is that I've started a meetup in London as well, and the meetup's called To Do, and I was kind of cajoled into it by a few friends who are like, there's not enough good meetups. You should do a meetup. You know loads of people. And initially I was like, oh, okay, I should probably do an iOS meetup then. And then I kind of thought about it more, and I was like, well, actually, that would be wrong. I mean, we keep talking about like working together as an iOS and kind of Android team. Like, why would I just do an iOS meetup? So yes, just to give you a little bit more of a flavor of kind of what To Do is about. Like, here's a few of the talks that will either have just happened or going to happen before Christmas. And well, one's about a guy who's moved from product management to making his own denim jeans. But none of them are about a specific technology. They're much more wide-ranging than that. And this really reflects the kind of new mindset that I have since we started all this.
Yeah, so we gave a few examples about like collaboration across like Swift and Kotlin. And I think this is just the beginning, to be honest. Like, if you've been following the latest Kotlin news, and as it was mentioned yesterday at yesterday's keynote, like things like multi-platform projects or Kotlin native are going to really like push us to actually share even more. Like for like Kotlin native gives a way to compile Kotlin code into LLVM, so you can actually essentially run like your code into iOS and Android and other architecture if you want. So it's like an obvious match for like cross-platform development. Also, multi-platform projects is like a feature that was a beta features that was brought with Kotlin 1.2, which gives a way to have like different implementation per target. So if you have like expect, you define your kind of interfaces, and then actual would be describing the different implementation on each of your targets. And this is pretty awesome, and I'm really excited about this kind of stuff because it means that JetBrains is actually opening up and like not really closing down Kotlin. So yeah, really excited to see what's coming for the next
yeah, definitely,
5 years or more.
So, I mean, obviously we're all naturally tribal, and we tend to want to stick together with the people who are most like us. And obviously the inverse is true as well. We tend to least associate with the people who are least like us. And I'm not going to suggest that like a programming language or even two programming languages are going to kind of fix these things. You know, we are still iOS and Android, back-end, front-end, cats and dogs. But I do think they give us something new, which we didn't have before with things like Java and Objective-C. They give us like a common ground. They give us a bridge, a new place that we can kind of come together and talk. And I think this is really important because I really believe that like you actually build better products when you collaborate with everyone. And the really cool thing about that is that you need that common ground in order to collaborate in the first place, which is kind of what we've been talking about all along. And when you have that, you start to develop empathy between the people in your teams. And the really cool thing about that, I think, is that It allows you to see what you have in common instead of what you don't, which means that you're going to find those better solutions that we kind of talked about at the top. And it's just a virtuous cycle. It just goes round and round. It just gets better over time. So we're about done now, but we just wanted to give you a few kind of takeaways for things that you could do in your workplace to kind of maybe take you down the same sort of journey that we've been on.
Yeah, so how to get started? I think the first point would be kickoffs. So if you don't do kickoffs already, try to organize that. And if you do, try to involve more people in that. You will be surprised how much can come out of this. Pair as much as possible. Pairing is not like try to organize some pairing across platforms. It might sound a bit like counterproductive, but it's really powerful to make your product more consistent and actually to learn more like that.
And it is fun actually as well,
Yeah,
once you break down your preconceptions about each other's platform.
Definitely. Share your work. So as we mentioned at the beginning, the mobile breakfast and technology. And technology was really powerful because you could come there and just share whatever you wanted, like side projects or like what you've been working on the past few weeks. Like if you don't have that kind of event, just try to organize one. It's pretty easy. Like take 1 hour like every 2 weeks during lunch, and yeah, just talk about anything. Always QA together. QAing shouldn't only be for QA. There's a lot of missed opportunities for for engineers to fix bugs by just QAing their app and the other app. So try to do that as much as possible. If you're new to Kotlin or Swift, well, that's completely cool. That's a really simple and cheap way to start, which is tests. Obviously, it's not as exciting as production code, but it's pretty simple to do. It doesn't involve having the runtime environment for your production code, so just start like that. Yeah, if you've been convinced by the backend frontend, try to talk about it with your team, because we all need a BFF in our lives, right? So yeah, just or if you're interested, just catch us after the talk. We'd be happy to talk about that. Yeah, and it's really easy to notice that things are wrong. For example, iOS and Android developers being together, but it's harder to actually make things right? But the thing is, nothing is going to ever change if we just all notice that this is wrong. So instead, we should just always try to be the change that we want to see.
Okay, so if that isn't enough, I'm going to leave you with one final thought, which is this. It's no exaggeration to say that it is because of Swift and Kotlin that we're here right now, that we've been to Warsaw and now to San Francisco, that we're kind of the friends that we are. We're two different people, iOS and Android, cats and dogs, I suppose, but we're different, but we're now on the same team. So yeah, maybe make friends with an iOS developer or two. Learn a little bit of Swift. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Unexpected.
You guys have experience pairing remotely, and I was wondering what are some best practices and tools you guys can share on that?
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
You sort of have a little bit this week, I guess, don't you?
I actually did that quite a lot the past few months. Not across platform, I haven't done that, but just in, there's something called Screen Hero. If you don't use it, if you don't know it, try installing it. It works really well. And obviously, you lose kind of the contact of having someone next to you, but it works really well for me because you can just move the other mouse when you want to, etc. So it feels very natural.
And use video a lot. I tried it using text, and it turned out horribly.
Yeah.
Really, really badly.
Yeah.
Oh.
So we actually never really focused on having the same architecture. We really wanted to have to focus on the pairing part of the exercise. So I think if we would have pushed the code, we could have got the code very close, I think.
Yeah, I mean, they naturally sort of ended up looking similar because obviously we were kind of working on both anyway. So I think there was probably they probably ended up looking similar, but we certainly didn't force it at any point. But they do look quite similar, particularly with the backend for front end layer pushing a lot of the logic up. All you really do have is one-way flows of data, so they do end up looking quite similar. Cool. No problem. Great. Thank you so much for all your time.
Thank you.